Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
My husband every evening left the house for a walk. One day he forgot his phone and a message came in. "When are you coming? I am waiting for you." When I drove to the address in his phone. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had a good life. Not a perfect one. I was never naive enough to believe in perfect, but good, solid. The kind of life you build slowly, brick by brick, with your hands and your trust and your 10 best years. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years when everything fell apart. We lived in a beige colonial house in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other from driveways and nobody ever raises their voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit, a joint savings account with a respectable balance, and dinner together most nights. I worked as a licensed occupational therapist at a pediatric clinic 20 minutes from home. Daniel managed logistics for a mid-sized manufacturing company downtown. We were, by every visible measure, fine. But I think I knew, the way women sometimes know things before they have words for them, that something had shifted. It started small, the way things like this always do. Daniel had always been a homebody. Saturday mornings he made pancakes. Sunday nights we watched whatever series we were working through on the couch, his feet tangled with mine under the blanket. He was not a man who went out, so when he started going on evening walks last spring, I noticed, but I told myself it was nothing. He'd been stressed at work. The doctor had mentioned his cholesterol. Exercise was good. I was glad he was taking care of himself. The walks became a routine. Every evening around 8:15, he'd lace up his sneakers, say, "I need some air, babe," and disappear for an hour and a half. Sometimes 2 hours. I started timing it without meaning to. Then came the small disappearances of attention. He'd sit across from me at dinner and his eyes would drift somewhere past my shoulder, like the wall behind me was more interesting than anything I could say. His phone, which used to rest face up on the kitchen counter, started traveling with him everywhere, to the bathroom, to the garage, even to the basement when he went down to check the furnace. Once I walked into the bedroom and caught him typing rapidly, and he tilted the screen away in one smooth, practiced motion, the way you do something you've done many times before. "Who are you texting?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Work thing," he said. He smiled at me. It was a convincing smile. I had spent 9 years studying that smile, and I still believed it. I wish I hadn't. There was also the cologne, a new one, something darker, warmer than what he usually wore. I found the bottle on the bathroom shelf one Tuesday morning. Black Orchid. It was expensive. I hadn't bought it, and there had been no birthday, no anniversary, no occasion of any kind. "You bought new cologne?" I asked. I got a good review at work, treated myself. Reasonable. Everything he said was reasonable. That was the thing about Daniel. He never gave me anything I could hold in my hands and call a lie. Just reasonable explanations, delivered in a reasonable voice, from behind a reasonable smile. I let it go. I let all of it go. Until the night he forgot his phone. It was a Wednesday in late October. He had left for his walk at 8:22. I know because I looked at the clock on the microwave, which I had started doing without thinking. He was gone maybe 4 minutes when I heard his phone buzz on the coffee table. He almost never forgot it. I glanced over out of habit. The screen lit up with a message preview. The name above it read, Monica. "When are you coming? I've been waiting for you so long." I sat very still for a moment. The television was on, some home renovation show with cheerful hosts. Biscuit was asleep at my feet. The house smelled like the chili I'd made for dinner. Everything was completely ordinary and completely destroyed at the same time. I picked up the phone. The message was the only one visible in the preview. Daniel had his notifications set to show one line. I put the phone back down. I sat there for 60 seconds, maybe longer, watching the screen go dark. Then I went to Daniel's email on our shared family laptop, the one we used for taxes and travel bookings, and I searched the address that had appeared below Monica's name in the preview. It led me to a location pin he had sent himself 3 weeks earlier. An apartment building on Elmwood Street, 6 miles from our house. I got in my car. I drove those 6 miles in silence. No music, no podcasts, nothing. Just the sound of the engine and my own breathing. I parked across the street from a brick building with lit windows and a glass front lobby. I looked up at the 3rd floor where a warm yellow light glowed behind half-drawn curtains. And I sat there in the dark, watching, while my marriage rearranged itself into something I no longer recognized. I drove home before Daniel got back. I don't know how long I sat outside that building on Elmwood Street. Long enough that the yellow light behind the 3rd floor curtains went off. Long enough that a couple walked their dog past my car and didn't glance twice at me. Long enough that I got cold even with the heat on. When I pulled back into our driveway, his sneakers were already by the front door. He was in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of water, freshly showered. I remember standing in the doorway and looking at him, really looking at him. Like you look at a painting you've passed 100 times and suddenly, one morning, realize you've never actually understood it. "There you are," he said, without turning around. "Where'd you go?" "Pharmacy," I said. "Toothpaste." He nodded. He set his glass in the sink. He kissed me on the cheek on his way to the bedroom, and his skin smelled of that dark, expensive cologne, and underneath it, faintly, something floral and foreign, a perfume that was not mine. I brushed my teeth for a very long time that night. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark beside my husband and cataloged everything I knew. 9 years, a joint mortgage with 14 years remaining, 2 shared bank accounts, 1 checking, 1 savings, my name and his on the deed to the house, his name alone on the retirement investment account he had opened before we married, which had grown substantially. My career, good but part-time since last year, when we had mutually decided that I would cut back on hours and we would try for a baby. A decision I had made in good faith, a decision that had cost me income and professional ground and now felt like a trap I had walked into with my eyes open and my hands full of trust. I thought about what leaving would look like, the real logistics of it, not the fantasy version. I thought about what he might do if I confronted him too soon, without evidence. I had heard enough stories from friends, from clients' parents in waiting rooms, from true crime podcasts I used to only half listen to. Confrontation without proof gives the other side time to prepare, time to hide assets, change accounts, coordinate stories, time to make you look unstable while they look reasonable. Daniel was very good at looking reasonable. I could not afford to be emotional. I needed to be precise. By 3 a.m, I had made a decision. I would not say a word. Not yet. I would watch, document, and build a case. The way my father, who had been a civil attorney for 31 years, always said you build anything meant to last. Foundation first, walls second, roof last. You don't show anyone the house until it's finished. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. I made coffee. I asked Daniel about his schedule. I scratched Biscuit behind the ears and watched my husband eat his toast and felt a cold, quiet clarity settle over me like the first snow of winter. Step 1. Secure my financial position. I opened a personal savings account that same afternoon, in my name only, at a bank different from the one we shared. I had kept a small freelance income separate from our joint account for years, a habit from before we married that I had never fully abandoned. I transferred that balance. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was the beginning. Step 2. Documentation. I bought a small notebook. Paper, not digital. Nothing that could be accessed or deleted remotely. I began writing down dates, times, durations of Daniel's absences. I noted the cologne, the phone behavior, the location on Elmwood Street. I wrote down the message from Monica verbatim, word for word, the way I had memorized it in the 60 seconds I sat staring at his screen. "When are you coming? I've been waiting for you so long." Step 3. Find out who Monica was. This part I did carefully. I didn't search from our home network. I drove to the public library on my lunch break and used their computers. I searched the address on Elmwood Street first. It was a mid-range apartment complex, 60 units, online listings showing one-bedrooms at around $1,200 a month. Then I searched the name Monica against Daniel's company, his LinkedIn connections, his college alumni network, working outward in careful circles. I found her on the third day. Monica Reyes, 31 years old, a sales coordinator at a logistics firm on the same business corridor where Daniel's company operated. Not his direct company, but the same industry, the same world, the same network of after-work happy hours and industry conferences and opportunities for people who worked close to each other to become something more. Her social media was partially public. She was attractive in a deliberate, put-together way, always photographed at angles, always with that particular expression of someone who knows they're being looked at. In her most recent posts, there was no mention of a partner, no photos with anyone consistent. But there were 2 photos from the past 6 months, taken at restaurants I recognized in our neighborhood, where I could see at the edge of the frame a man's sleeve, a dark jacket, the same dark jacket Daniel had worn to a company dinner in September. I sat in the library parking lot afterward and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to feel what I felt. Then I started planning. The law office of Patricia Ellman was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Chicago. I had chosen Patricia specifically, not randomly, not on emotion. I had spent a week reading Bar Association reviews, case outcomes, attorney profiles. Patricia Ellman had 22 years of family law experience, a reputation for methodical preparation, and a client base that skewed toward women navigating financially complex divorces. Her consultation fee was $300 for 90 minutes. I paid it from my personal account, the new one, and I told Daniel I had a continuing education workshop. I sat across from Patricia in a clean, neutral office with no family photos and no decorative flourishes, just books, files, and a woman with sharp gray eyes who listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "You haven't confronted him," she said. "No." "Good. Don't. Not yet." She pulled out a yellow legal pad. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets are divided fairly. Not necessarily equally, but fairly based on contribution, duration, and conduct. The fact that you reduced your working hours at his suggestion during a period framed as preparation for a family is relevant. It speaks to economic disadvantage created by the marriage. I'll want documentation of that conversation. I had texts. I had emails. I had a voice message where Daniel said in his reasonable voice, "I just think it makes sense for you to scale back, babe, and we'll make it work on my salary." I had kept them for no reason I could have named at the time. Some instinct, maybe. The same one that had made me keep my freelance account separate. Patricia wrote 3 pages of notes. She told me what to document, what to preserve, what not to touch. She told me to photograph every financial document I could access. Mortgage statements, bank statements, any investment disclosures, and store copies somewhere Daniel could not reach. I left her office feeling for the first time in 10 days like I was standing on solid ground. Meanwhile, something was changing on Elmwood Street. I didn't know this directly, not yet, but I had begun to follow a quiet, methodical pattern. Twice a week I drove past the building at different times, different routes, never stopping, never drawing attention. And I noticed that Daniel's walks had become shorter. He was coming home after 50 minutes instead of 90. Once he stayed home entirely, claiming a headache, and spent the evening on his phone in the garage. He was pulling back from Monica. I could feel it without being able to name it yet. A subtle tightening in him, a new restlessness, like a man trying to close a door that won't fully latch. Monica, I would later understand, felt it too. The evidence came on a Thursday morning, 11 days after my first consultation with Patricia. Daniel had taken his car to the dealership for a service check and asked me to drive him. On the way home, his phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. He had forgotten it was connected, or he had stopped thinking about it, or he was simply careless in the way that people become careless when they've been careful for too long. The name on the dashboard display read, Monica R. He grabbed the phone fast and canceled the call. "Work," he said without looking at me. "At 8:15 in the morning." "She's in a different time zone." He paused. "She works with a vendor in Dallas." I said nothing. I watched the road. Inside, I was absolutely still. The stillness of someone who has stopped hoping and started documenting. That evening, while Daniel showered, I did something Patricia had advised me to be cautious about, but had not forbidden. I checked his phone. He had left it on the bed. Another small carelessness, another latched door starting to swing open. I had 40 seconds, maybe less. I didn't read messages. I took a single photograph of his recent call log with my own phone. Monica's number appeared 7 times in the past 10 days. 3 late nights, 2 early mornings, one that lasted 44 minutes. I sent the image to my private email, then to a cloud folder only I had access to, set up under an alternate address. Then I put his phone back exactly as I had found it, face down, slightly angled, and I went downstairs and asked Daniel if he wanted tea. He said yes. I made 2 cups, set his on the counter, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the backyard go dark. The maple tree we had planted together the first year in this house was losing its last leaves. Biscuit nosed at my hand. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. I had my first concrete evidence. I had an attorney. I had a plan, and Monica Reyes had no idea I existed. The papers were filed on a Tuesday in mid-November. Patricia had prepared everything: petition for dissolution of marriage, grounds of irreconcilable differences. Illinois was a no-fault state, which meant I didn't need to prove the affair for the divorce itself, though documentation of it remained valuable for asset arguments. The petition included a formal request for equitable distribution of all marital property and a claim for compensatory consideration based on my documented reduction in earning capacity during the marriage. Daniel was served at his office. I had specified that. Patricia's process server handed him the envelope in the lobby of his building at 10:45 in the morning in front of the receptionist and 2 colleagues he had lunch with every Friday. I was at work when it happened. I was with a 7-year-old boy with sensory processing difficulties, helping him navigate a bead maze, and my phone was in my locker. By the time I checked it at noon, there were 4 missed calls from Daniel and a text that read, "Call me right now." I called Patricia instead. "He's been served," I said. "I know. My office received confirmation. How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I said. And I was. Not in the way of someone who feels nothing, but in the way of someone who has decided that feeling will come later, when it is safe to feel. I drove home after my shift knowing that the next hours would be turbulent. I had prepared for this. I had moved my most important documents, financial records, copies of evidence, my notebook, to a safety deposit box at the bank 2 weeks earlier. I had spoken to my sister, Renata, who lived 40 minutes away, and told her everything. Renata was steady, practical, and furious on my behalf, which was exactly what I needed. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He had the divorce papers in front of him, and his face was a composition I had never seen before. Not the reasonable, managed face, but something underneath it, stripped and raw and frightened. "You went to a lawyer," he said. "Yes," without telling me. "Yes." He pushed the papers across the table like they were something he didn't want touching his hands. "Claire, we need to talk about this. There's things you don't understand." "I understand enough," I said. That night, he slept in the guest room. He did not argue, which surprised me. I think the papers had told him something that my face never had, that I was serious, and that I had been planning for longer than he knew. Monica Reyes called me the next morning. I didn't know her number at the time. I had her name in my documentation, but not her personal cell. She had gotten mine from somewhere, which told me she and Daniel had been discussing me with more coordination than I had expected. Her voice was cool and deliberate, with an accent that flattened certain vowels. "I think we should talk," she said, "woman to woman." "I don't have anything to say to you," I replied. "Maybe I have things to say to you." A pause. "Daniel and I have been together for over a year. He was going to tell you. You jumping to lawyers just made things harder than they needed to be." I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and I thought, she is trying to take inventory of what I know and what I'm capable of. This was not a peace call. This was reconnaissance. "And if you contact me again without going through my attorney," I said, "I'll document it." She laughed, a short, controlled sound. "You're going to make this ugly for yourself, you know that? Daniel has more assets than you think, and he knows how to protect them. This doesn't have to go to court." "Goodbye, Monica," I said, and ended the call. My hands were shaking. I set the phone on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cool tile and breathed. Then I picked the phone back up and called Patricia and told her every word. Patricia added it to the file. What followed was 2 weeks of pressure. Calls from Daniel's attorney disputing my claims of financial disadvantage, a joint account that Daniel had partially drained before I'd thought to freeze it. Patricia moved quickly. A judge issued a financial restraining order within 4 days. And Monica sending a long email to my work address, a message designed to sound reasonable while implying I was unstable and vindictive. I printed every email, I forwarded every call log, I documented every word. And then, at the end of November, I drove to Renata's house, dropped my bag on her guest room floor, and slept for 11 hours. I needed 3 days. I gave myself 3 days. No lawyer calls, no surveillance, no notebooks. Just Renata's cooking and her 2 loud children, and the specific mercy of being known by someone who had known me before Daniel. On the 4th morning, I made coffee, sat at Renata's kitchen table, and told myself, "You are not finished." I wasn't. The offer came through Patricia on a Monday, 10 days into December. Daniel's attorney, a smooth-voiced man named Gerald Fitch, who Patricia had dealt with before and described as procedurally competent and ethically flexible, presented what he called a reasonable resolution package. The terms were as follows: a clean split of the joint checking account, Daniel retaining full ownership of the house, Claire receiving a cash payment of $40,000 as compensatory transition support, and both parties waiving any further financial claims. Patricia read the terms to me over the phone in a level voice. "He wants to keep the house and give me $40,000 to disappear," I said. "That is the substance of the offer, yes." The house we had bought together was currently valued at $430,000. We had paid down nearly 40% of the mortgage. My financial contribution over 9 years, including the 2 years I had worked extra shifts to cover his period of reduced income when his company restructured, was not invisible. It was documented. "No," I said. "I want to make sure you've considered—" "I have considered it, no." Patricia paused. I could hear the quiet satisfaction in her silence. "I'll notify Fitch." I hung up and sat for a moment in my car. I had taken the call into the parking lot of the clinic, and I looked at the gray December sky above the rooftops and felt something cold and clean move through me. Not anger. Not grief, something closer to resolve. The offer had told me something useful. They were worried about what I could prove, worried enough to try to pay me into silence before it reached a courtroom. People don't offer money to problems that don't threaten them. After that, the pressure from Daniel and Monica went quiet. Not gone, just recalibrated. Watching and waiting. I could feel it the way you feel a weather shift before the temperature changes, some atmospheric pressure your body registers before your mind does. I used that quiet. I called my father. Robert Henson had been a civil attorney in Cleveland for 31 years and was now retired, living in a house by a lake with his second wife and a garden he tended with the same methodical patience he had once applied to depositions. He was 67 years old, measured in his speech, and he loved me in that particular way of fathers who show love through competence. By solving things for you, by being the person in the room who knows how things work. I told him everything. Not the edited version I had been giving people, but the real version. The 9 years, the cologne, the phone, Elmwood Street, Monica's call, the insulting settlement offer. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "You went to an attorney before you confronted him," he said. "Yes." "Good girl." Another pause. "Send me everything Patricia's filed. I want to review." He could not represent me. He was retired and in a different state. But having him review the strategy, ask questions, flag details Patricia might not have visibility on, was worth more than I could say. For the first time in 7 weeks, I felt like I had the weight of someone else's certainty beside mine. I called old friends I had let drift during the marriage. The slow drift that happens in long relationships where your world gradually narrows to the shape of another person. My college roommate, Deb, who lived in Portland and worked in HR and had been through her own ugly divorce 4 years earlier. My friend Jasmine, who was sharp and unsentimental and made me laugh until I ached at things that shouldn't be funny. I told them. Not as a confession, not as a performance of victimhood, just as the truth of what was happening in my life. The support came back in waves. Texts, calls, care packages from Deb with books, and a card that said you were always the strong one, and now it's time to let yourself know it. Jasmine drove in from Evanston one Saturday and took me for a long brunch, where we talked about everything except Daniel and Monica for 2 hours. And then we talked about them for 1 more. And by the time I drove home, I felt scraped clean and restored. I started running again, something I had abandoned 3 years into the marriage when Daniel had made quiet comments about me leaving too early in the mornings. 3 miles, then 4. Cold air, gray streets, just the sound of my own breathing and the slow reclamation of my own body's rhythms. I was not the same woman who had sat outside that building on Elmwood Street in the dark. I was beginning to understand what I was capable of. They came on a Saturday morning in mid-January. I was in the kitchen with coffee and my father's annotated notes on the asset division when I heard the car in the driveway. I recognized Daniel's Audi. What I did not expect was the passenger door opening and Monica Reyes stepping out. She was shorter than I had imagined from her photographs, dressed carefully. Neutral coat, minimal jewelry. She was holding herself with the particular composure of someone who had rehearsed the morning and intended to control it. I watched from the kitchen window for a moment before I went to the door. I opened it before they could knock. Daniel looked exhausted and rehearsed. "Claire," he said, "we just want to talk. Civilly." "I have an attorney," I said. "Anything related to the divorce should go through—" "This isn't about the divorce." He held up one hand. "Not specifically. We just want a conversation. You and me and Monica, like adults." I should have closed the door. I knew that technically, procedurally, I should have closed the door and called Patricia, but I let them in. Later, I would understand why. I wanted to see what they would do when they believed they had an advantage. We sat in the living room, Daniel on the couch where he had sat every Sunday for 9 years, Monica beside him with her hands folded in her lap, and me in the armchair across from them, straight-backed, coffee in hand. Monica spoke first. "I know you're hurting," she began. Her voice was measured, warm in a manufactured way. The warmth of someone who has decided warmth is the most effective tool. And I want you to know that neither of us wanted it to go this way. But what's happening now? the legal process, the financial freezes. It's damaging everyone, including you. How is it damaging me? I asked. Protracted litigation is expensive and emotionally costly. We've looked at comparable cases. She glanced at Daniel, and he nodded on cue. You could come out of this significantly less than you're hoping, and years from now with nothing but legal fees and a court record. We've looked at comparable cases. She had been consulting someone, or she was implying she had to make herself sound more formidable than she was. What I'm hoping, I said, is for a fair settlement based on the documented facts of this marriage. The house was largely paid with Daniel's income, Monica said, and just like that, the warmth was gone. Cleanly, completely, like a light switched off. Underneath it was something colder and more honest. Your reduced income over the past 2 years wasn't an agreement. It was a lifestyle choice. No judge is going to award you half of an asset you contributed minimally to. There it was, the mask gone. I set my coffee cup down on the table. That's interesting, I said, because I have emails, texts, and a voicemail in which my husband explicitly suggested I reduce my hours and assured me our finances would cover it. I have 2 years of tax returns showing my prior earning level, and I have a family law attorney with 22 years of experience who specializes in exactly this scenario. I looked at Monica. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? Her jaw tightened, a small controlled movement. Daniel leaned forward. Claire, we can still resolve this without dragging everything into a courtroom, then instruct Gerald Fitch to present a fair offer, I said. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. Monica stood first. You're making a mistake, she said. Her voice had gone flat and precise, the synthetic warmth long gone. That's for a judge to decide, I said. I walked them to the door. Monica went first, down the porch steps without looking back. Daniel paused in the doorway and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between apology and appeal. The face of a man hoping someone else will solve the problem he created. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my back against it, and I let myself feel for exactly a moment the spike of cold fear that the visit had left behind. Not of Monica, exactly, but of the thing she represented. Someone willing to be ruthless. Someone who saw this as a competition with rules she was comfortable bending. Then I felt the fear convert. The way it had been doing more and more lately. I pushed off the wall. I picked up the phone. I called my father. Then I called Patricia and told her about the visit in full detail. She added it to the file. They came to your home unannounced and made financial arguments directly to you, she said. That's noted. We'll address it. I went back to my father's notes, picked up my pen, and kept working. The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday in February. I had been preparing for it in one form or another since October. Since the night I sat outside a building on Elmwood Street and watched a lit window go dark. 4 months of documentation, 4 months of methodical, unhurried certainty. By the time Patricia and I walked into the DuPage County Courthouse on a gray February morning, I felt no fear. I felt calibrated. Patricia was in her element. Dark suit, legal pad, a rolling file case organized with the particular intimacy of someone who had lived inside this case for months. We had gone over the evidence twice that week. the documented financial contributions, the voicemail in which Daniel encouraged me to reduce my hours, the 2 years of tax returns showing the gap in my earnings, the partial account drain in November, reversed by court order but not forgotten, and carefully the call log photograph from October showing 7 calls to and from Monica in 10 days. The affair was not the grounds for the divorce, but it was context. It spoke to a pattern of deception that had run, parallel and hidden, beneath the entire financial structure of the marriage. Patricia had argued successfully that it was relevant to questions of conduct and equitable fairness. Daniel came in with Gerald Fitch. He was dressed in the good gray suit he wore to presentations, the one I had helped him pick out 3 years ago at a department store in the city. He didn't look at me. Monica was not in the courtroom, but I would later learn she had been sitting in the parking garage 3 floors below, messaging Daniel throughout the proceedings. This would matter. The morning session was procedural. Introduction of evidence, stipulation of facts, submission of financial documentation from both parties. Gerald Fitch presented Daniel's case with polished confidence, emphasizing his primary income contribution, his name on the investment account predating the marriage, and what he called Claire's voluntary reduction in professional engagement. Patricia introduced the voicemail. It was played in full. Daniel's voice very clear, saying, "I just think it makes sense for you to scale back, babe. We'll make it work on my salary, don't worry about it." The air in the courtroom changed. Fitch tried to characterize it as a casual conversation, not a binding agreement. Patricia noted that the subsequent 2 years of Claire's tax returns showed an average annual earnings reduction of $31,000. 2 years, $62,000 removed from her professional earning trajectory as a direct result of that arrangement. She introduced the text thread from the same period in which Daniel had confirmed this decision in writing. Twice. In the afternoon session, Daniel testified. He was composed at first, reasonable, as always, but Patricia's cross-examination was precise and relentless. She walked him through dates, through specific calls, through the partial account drain in November. Mr. Henson, on November 14th, $4,000 was transferred from the joint checking account to an account in your name only, correct? I needed funds for, yes, after your wife filed for divorce. I was, a yes or no, please. Yes? And you were aware that marital assets are subject to equitable distribution? Fitch objected. The judge sustained, but the rhythm had been disrupted, and Daniel knew it. Then Patricia asked about the phone calls in October. She had the call log. Daniel confirmed the number belonged to Monica Reyes. She asked about the nature of his relationship with Miss Reyes. He described it under oath in terms that were carefully minimized. A friendship, a colleague, someone he had spoken to during a difficult period in his marriage. Were you receiving advice from Ms. Reyes today during these proceedings? Fitch objected on relevance. Patricia told the judge she could establish relevance in 1 minute. The judge gave her the minute. Patricia submitted a printout. During the lunch recess, Daniel's phone had received 17 messages from Monica's number. He had read them. The read receipts were time-stamped. 2 of Daniel's afternoon answers had mirrored, almost verbatim, phrasing from those messages, phrasing that had not appeared in any prior deposition or documentation. Ms. Reyes was coaching your testimony, Patricia said. That's not... Mr. Henson, were you reading messages from Ms. Reyes during the recess and incorporating her suggestions into your testimony? The silence lasted 4 seconds. I may have... We spoke during lunch. It was not an admission of perjury. It did not need to be. What it was a man who had stopped being reasonable, who had been caught mid-performance, and who could not locate the right expression fast enough to cover it. Every person in that courtroom saw his face in those 4 seconds and understood something. I sat at the table and watched, and I felt nothing but clarity, clean and absolute, like a window that has finally been washed. The judge's ruling came 8 days later, delivered in a 14-page written decision. I read it at Patricia's office, seated across from her desk on a cold Monday morning with snow coming down outside the 14th floor window. Patricia read key passages aloud, which I think she did because she knew this moment deserved to be spoken, not just absorbed in silence. The court awarded me the marital home, full ownership, with Daniel required to refinance or sell his equity stake within 90 days. The home's current appraised value was $432,000. My documented equity contribution, financial and otherwise, had been recognized. The court granted me 38% of Daniel's premarital investment account on the grounds that I had demonstrably contributed to the conditions that allowed it to grow during the marriage, specifically my agreement to reduce my working hours, which had enabled him to take on more demanding professional responsibilities. The voicemail, the tax returns, and the documented correspondence were cited explicitly. The court ordered Daniel to cover my attorney's fees, both Patricia's fees and the costs associated with the financial restraining order proceedings in November. Gerald Fitch's fees, presumably, were Daniel's own problem. The partial account drain in November, though reversed, was noted in the ruling as evidence of financial misconduct during the proceedings, which factored into the conduct-based components of the distribution and the matter of Monica Reyes and the courtroom messages. The judge did not pursue it criminally. It had not risen to the level of provable perjury, but she included a formal notation in the record acknowledging that a third party had communicated with the respondent during testimony in a manner that appeared intended to influence his answers. It was not an indictment, but it was on record, permanently. I sat in Patricia's office and looked at the snow outside the window and felt something I had not felt in months. The absence of tension, not happiness. That would come later, slower, earned in smaller pieces. But the lifting of a weight I had been carrying since October, since a lit window on Elmwood Street, since a message on someone else's phone that had arrived in my life like a stone thrown through glass. "This is a good outcome," Patricia said. "Yes," I said, "it is." Daniel had 90 days to deal with the house. He did not contest the ruling. Fitch had apparently advised him, correctly, that there was nothing to contest. He vacated within 6 weeks. I heard from my neighbor Carol that he had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city. I heard from other sources, mutual acquaintances, the small inevitable information flows of shared lives, that Daniel's colleagues at work had become aware of the circumstances of the divorce. Specifically, the portion of the hearing that had involved Monica coaching his testimony. It had not been broadcast, but it had filtered. These things always filter. His performance review that spring was, I was told, notably less glowing than in prior years. His company began a quiet internal review of interdepartmental conduct policies. Monica Reyes, whose firm shared professional events and contracts with Daniel's company, found herself no longer included in certain joint meetings. She resigned from her position in April. The official reason, I was told, was pursuing other opportunities. I did not feel satisfaction about any of this in the way I might once have expected. I did not feel vindictive. I felt, more than anything, like someone who had survived an encounter with the current stronger than themselves and had made it to shore. Not by thrashing, but by being steady and knowing which way the water moved. I signed the final paperwork on a Tuesday morning. I drove home. I let Biscuit out into the backyard. I stood on the back porch of my house, and watched him run through the last of the February snow, and I breathed. By the following autumn, the maple tree in the backyard had turned gold again. I noticed it differently that year. The first autumn of the marriage, I had taken a photograph of it and sent it to Daniel at work. This year, I took a photograph for myself, standing on the back porch in the early morning with Biscuit at my feet and coffee cooling in my hand. And I looked at it the way you look at something that is simply uncomplicated yours. I had gone back to full-time at the clinic in March. My director had welcomed it. There had been a staff shortage during the winter, and she had been holding a caseload for me. Within 3 months, I had my full patient roster back, and by summer I had been asked to take on a supervisory role for 2 new graduate placement therapists. More hours, more responsibility, more income, the kind of professional momentum I had let slow during the marriage. It moved fast once I cleared the ground for it. My personal account, the quiet one I had opened in October, the beginning of my own foundation, had grown in a way that surprised me. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. I was careful with money now, not from fear, but from clarity. I understood what it was worth to be financially independent. I understood what it cost when you weren't. My father called every Sunday. He never said I told you so because he had never told me so. He had never told me anything about Daniel, though I sometimes wondered if he had seen something in those early years that he kept quiet out of respect for my choices. What he said now was simply, "You did well, Claire. You were patient, and you were smart, and you did well," which was, from him, the full cathedral of praise. I was running 6 miles now. I had signed up for a half marathon in May and finished it in 2 hours and 19 minutes, which was better than I expected. Renata had stood at the finish line with a sign that said, "Divorce looks good on you," in large orange letters, and I had laughed until I cried. I started dating in the summer, tentatively without urgency. A teacher named Marcus, who had a dry sense of humor and cooked elaborate Sunday breakfasts. Nothing serious, nothing rushed, just the quiet pleasure of choosing, freely, what I wanted. Daniel, from what came to me through peripheral channels, was doing poorly in the way of a man whose life had been reorganized by his own choices. He was still at the same company, though in a different role, laterally reassigned, not promoted. The apartment on the north side was small. I had heard through Carol that he had attempted briefly to reconcile with Monica after the divorce was finalized, and that this had not lasted. I received this information the way you receive a weather report about a city you used to live in. I noted it, and it meant nothing. Monica Reyes had not resurfaced in any meaningful way. She had left her position in April, as I knew, and I had heard, through Jasmine, who had a broader social network than almost anyone I knew, that she had moved out of the apartment on Elmwood Street later that spring. Whether by choice or financial necessity, I didn't know. I didn't look. What I knew was this, that the morning she had called me and said, "You're going to make this ugly for yourself," she had been wrong about which one of us would end up holding the ugliness. I had chosen to be methodical rather than reactive. I had chosen to document rather than confront, to consult rather than assume, to act from preparation rather than pain. It had taken patience of a kind I hadn't known I possessed until it was required of me. And the house, my house full of morning light and the sound of biscuits' nails on the hardwood and the maple going gold outside, was mine. All of it was mine. If this story has taught me anything, it is this: how you respond to betrayal matters as much as the betrayal itself. I could have screamed. I could have confronted Daniel that first night with a shaking voice and watched him pivot into denial. I could have let Monica's phone call unravel me. Instead, I went quiet, and I went to work, and I trusted the process. Grief is real. Anger is real. But neither one of them builds anything. Clarity does. Patience does. Knowing your worth and being willing to prove it, that does. I came out of 9 years with my integrity, my home, my career, and my name intact. I came out knowing more about myself than I had known going in. So I want to ask you, if you had been standing in my driveway that night, holding someone else's phone, reading a message not meant for you, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him? Would you have crumbled? Or would you have driven to that address, gone home in the dark, and started quietly planning? If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar or necessary or true, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. I read every single one, and thank you for listening to the whole thing. It meant more than you know.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.